Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this 2024 Autumn Budget Highlights Summary, the Rapid Reaction webinar. We've had around 500 register for this event, so it's great to host everyone. If anyone has any technical issues, please feel free to contact us using the chat function. So the point of this webinar this afternoon is really to just distill down the key announcements from the Chancellor's budget speech earlier today, and to pull out the critical elements that will impact owner-managed businesses, their owners, and their employees. So also on the panel this afternoon, we've got Jerry Surtees, tax advisor here. Afternoon, Jerry.
Good afternoon. Looking forward to getting into the detail. So just a very quick introduction to Oldfield for anyone on the call that perhaps hasn't come across us before. We're an accountancy and business growth specialist with over 47 years of experience in helping small and medium businesses achieve success. And we have a strong focus in 4 key areas, which is helping people to increase profits, improve cash, build business value, and increase their tax efficiency. And we, as the slide there says, we really do make it our business to truly understand yours. So with that, we'll get straight into the detail. I mean, first reactions, wow, that was quite a set of announcements. First Labour budget for 14 years, and it's certainly made an impact. Details are still sinking in, but by any standards, the impact of that is going to be felt both now and for the years to come. Ultimately, the Chancellor was on a mission to deliver £40 billion of additional tax revenues. And she's laid out extensive plans for investing in public services. Invest, invest, invest is something we're probably going to hear a lot of, that phrase. Of particular interest, I think it's just worth noting before we get into the tax details, the 2 big areas that kind of stood out for me in terms of investment was in education in the schools, and I think they said it would be 6.7 billion of capital investment and an increase of 11.2 billion in day-to-day spending in education, and 3.1 billion of capital investment into the NHS, with 22.6 billion increase in day-to-day spending. So I think that's of interest for a lot of businesses that are on the call today, and worth making a note of. What's your first reaction, Joe?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that hit me was that you might say from an employee's perspective, there was no real impact. So there's no handouts, but then there was no real cost either. The biggest thing is that everything was fairly well laid at the door of the employers and of the businesses. All the increases were all in their direction, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So just on the business side of things, I think probably the obvious ones most people are probably going to wonder about what happened was capital gains tax. It was fairly widely rumoured before the budget that there was going to be increases. Very unknown how much. Some were suggesting up to the full level of income tax rates, others suggesting they wouldn't go quite that far. So what the Chancellor's decided to do is increase the rates of capital gains tax. So the lower rate from 10% up to 18%, and then the higher rate from 20% to 24%. And I think the key thing here is that applies for any disposals, so any capital gains disposals from today's date. So it's had an immediate effect. So you might say the sale of commercial property or some shares yesterday would have been taxed at the 10% or the 20% rate, whereas if you sold it today, it would be at the 18% or the 24% rate. So that is one key thing to be aware of. And the Chancellor also then went on to say that she would be maintaining the business asset disposal relief, £1 million lifetime allowance. So the first £1 million that qualifies for business asset disposal relief, or BADR, currently at 10% tax. So she said to maintain the £1 million. However, the catch in there is that the rate would increase from 10% to 14% from April 2025. so 6th of April 2025, and then it go up another 4% to 18% from April 2026. So from April 26, BADR, you will still get you might say a better rate than the 24% standard rate of capital gains tax. However, it's just a lot less of an impact. So if you look at your £1 million lifetime allowance, at 6%, you effectively got a maximum saving of £60,000 there.
So they're aligning it ultimately with the lower rate of capital gains tax, the new lower rate, which will be 18% over the next couple of years. And essentially the differential between that and the higher rate, the main rate of capital gains tax of 24%, will only be 6%. So the maximum you could possibly save is £1 million times 6%, which is 60 grand. So very much lessening the impact of that relief, although they haven't removed it entirely.
Yeah, and it's probably going to change perspectives and in terms of perhaps older generation holding on to shares, trying to make sure they're still holding to enough to qualify. Actually, with some of the inheritance tax implications, it kind of changes that, doesn't it? It's less of an impact, less of a thing to consider than the ADR. So a couple of other changes that were announced for businesses. So in terms of business rates, there's quite a number of announcements relating specifically to the hospitality and leisure industries and retail. Further details to follow on those. There wasn't too much detail, but beyond that, it didn't really impact any of the main industries. The other big one for businesses was the employer's national insurance, which again was widely rumoured beforehand. I think some rumours beforehand were saying a 2% increase. What she's actually done is increased it by 1.2%, so it's gone from 13.8% up to 15%, and that will apply from 6th of April 2025, so from April 2025. But then alongside that, what she's also done has decreased the threshold at which businesses start to pay that. So as general, businesses pay employers' national insurance on an employee's earnings over £9,100, which has reduced that down to £5,000, again from April 2025. So you'll have an increased rate and be paying on more of the employee's salary. She has increased the employment allowance. So employment allowance is you might say a tax-free amount. So it increased from £5,000 to £10,500. And she appears to have removed some of the restrictions around who that applies to. So employment allowance typically applies to anyone with a Class 1A national insurance liability, annual liability of less than £100,000, but she appears to, on first glances, remove that so it now applies to all businesses.
So as far as corporation tax is concerned, as they promised, they haven't increased the main rate of corporation tax, and they're publishing what they call a corporation tax roadmap, I think early next year. But essentially, the rates and bands are all remaining the same. No increases, no changes. R&D and patent box reliefs will remain exactly as they are at the moment, which is good news. And there's also going to be a consultation providing advance assurance for businesses that potentially qualify for R&D. So that's just a consultation at this point. But if they did decide to introduce that, that would be very welcome because it would increase certainty in that area, which has been lacking recently. They're maintaining the £1 million annual investment allowance for capital spend, and also the full expensing where that applies. However, there is some, we've noticed so far in the small print, they have made a passing reference that extending that to assets bought for leasing and hiring will be considered when fiscal conditions allow, whatever that means. So not just yet, in other words. The only other point of interest is the changes to what we call Section 455 rules, which are basically anti-avoidance provisions, so won't, from what we can see, impact anything that that our clients are doing. Just strengthening the rules to prevent people trying to circumvent them with complex structures.
Yeah. And then moving on to personal tax and some of the more tax implications around directors and shareholders personally and employees, some of these. In terms of car benefits, they are looking to move the car benefit in kind rates for hybrid vehicles more closer in line with petrol and diesel vehicles. So less of a benefit there. From an initial glance, it looked like they might be making it a bit simpler in terms of taking away the all-electric range, but again, only initial glance. There is no further information available at the moment. They are also continuing to increase the rates of benefit in kind for electric vehicles. So I think by the time it gets to 2029-30 tax year, the electric vehicle rates would actually be 9%, which is quite a significant jump up from where it is currently. And the other announcement, they didn't announce it, is probably the key thing to note. It was just slipped into the detail of the documents, is that they are classing double cab pickups with, so previously where a double cab pickup has a payload of more than a ton, it's been regarded as a commercial vehicle. They are changing their stance on that and will be treating that as a car for corporation tax and, more importantly, benefit in kind from April 2025. Now, previous government tried to do this and it wasn't very popular and they backtracked, but they have just slipped that back in again. Now they have included an exclusion for any vehicles that are ordered or leased or before 6th of April 2025. So anyone who currently has a vehicle shouldn't be impacted because they'll get transitional arrangements. But effectively, as soon as you order your next vehicle, after that point, that's when it'll transfer across to the new arrangements with a long stop date of 2029. Another couple of things on smaller things, high income child benefit charge. So the previous government announced that they were going to look at ways to make that fairer in terms of looking at a couple's income rather than an individual parent's income when working out whether you have to pay the high income child benefit charge. The current Chancellor has said that is too expensive to look into and too expensive to implement. So they are scrapping the reform on that. So the current system will prevail. Then another widely speculated one, or well, one that we really knew before the budget, was the VAT on school fees. So they've confirmed that VAT will be payable on school fees from 1st of January 2025. And that applies to both the education and the boarding services at the standard rate of 20% VAT.
And the point there, sorry to interrupt, was just that there was some speculation that they might be convinced to push it back to the start of the next school year, so September 25, I suppose. But they have confirmed today that it will be from the 1st of January 25.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the other area that they've been under pressure on was in relation to special educational needs. So where you might say the public schools can't cater for that child's needs. They've said that where it can only be met in a private school situation and the local authorities are paying for it or funding it, then the local authorities or devolved government can reclaim the VAT. So the important point is, if you are sending your child to private school and you're paying for it personally because of it doesn't feel like public school can meet their needs, you still will have to pay the VAT. There's no reclaiming it in that scenario, as far as we can tell. And the other impact for private schools was that they'll no longer be eligible for charitable rate relief on business rates from April 2025. So that's going to hit private schools quite a bit. And then another rumour there was before the budget was in relation to stamp duty land tax, whether that could be increased or what would happen on that. For the majority of people, it was no change. The only change they did make was in relation to the higher rate for additional dwellings. So that is for people who are buying, second houses, additional dwellings. That has increased by 2%, so from 3% to 5%. And the important point being that is effective from tomorrow. So from tomorrow onwards, that would apply. And that will also apply to any non-residents buying additional property or any corporate, so any limited companies buying residential property, that'll also apply. But then they didn't make any changes to stamp duty on shares, so that was good. Welcome.
Yeah, so that's a small positive.
Yeah.
The other thing that was a small bit of good news is that there's no change to the dividend tax rates. So there was a fair bit of speculation ahead of the budget as to whether that might happen, and a few dividends being rushed through. But thankfully, they haven't made any changes to that, so that's good. And as previously confirmed, no change to income tax, no change to the rates or bands. They have said that rates will increase in line with inflation from 2028 onwards, April 2028 onwards, which feels like quite a long way away. But that's all. The big area, the final big area, I think, where there have been some very significant changes is inheritance tax. And there's a number of points to mention on that. They have said that they're going to reapply inheritance tax to pension funds with effect from April 2027, which is a pretty major shift, given that for the best part of 10 years, they have been an effective, useful inheritance tax planning tool. That's no longer going to be the case. So there's going to need to be a shift. The idea is that the shift to spending that money that you've got in your pension rather than saving it for the next generation. There's going to be an impact on people that have got property, illiquid assets in pension funds, as to what they do with those. It's unusual in our experience that there's a somewhat retrospective impact on by changing the rules in that way, in that people have already put money into pensions and they're then thinking that they would get inheritance tax relief, and they're now saying, no, you're not going to get that after all. So it'll be interesting to see what the fallout is from that. And there'll be some planning and things to think about around that. The other area of significant change on inheritance tax is on business relief, which is an area that, again, there was a lot of talk ahead of the budget about this potentially changing. So there's a £1 million exemption on business qualifying assets, which are usually shares in a trading company or capital in a trading partnership. And above that, the relief will be reduced to 50%. So in other words, 50% of your business assets over £1 million will become subject to inheritance tax. And that's with effect from April 2026. The other thing is that the 50% rate also applies to AIM shares as well. So for anybody that's got AIM shares, they will still qualify for business relief, but only at the 50% rate, and the £1 million doesn't apply to AIM shares.
I think that was one of the biggest changes that we noticed, wasn't it? When you take business owners pay shares worth £3 million, suddenly, instead of them being 100% covered by business property relief, you've got the first million covered, and then you've got 2 million then exposed to only 50% relief.
Absolutely.
Quite significant.
So an effective rate of 20% on that extra £2 million. So very significant. And again, is going to have quite an impact on people's succession planning and other planning around things like double dipping wills. For those that have got those, will also be impacted as well. So lots of detail to think through on that. Thankfully, one area that was speculated about was gifting, changes to the 7-year rule for gifting, which there was no announcements on that, no changes on that, which is good news. So there's scope to use gifting to help out with some of these changes. More detail on that to be thought through and talked about in due course. And also what are known as non-doms, persons that are not domiciled in the UK, will fall, that are UK resident but non-domiciled, will fall within the scope of inheritance tax from April 2025. So that's the announcements that we've picked up so far. Huge amount to digest, and we're fully appreciate that there's going to be a lot of questions going through everyone's minds, some very significant impacts to a lot of people, particularly businesses. We're still digesting it. A lot to take in, a lot to think about, a lot of technical detail to trawl through, which we haven't obviously had time to do yet. So we're going to be doing that, and we're going to be hearing what other commentators have got to say about it as well over the coming days. So please bear with us while we do this. Some very significant changes. Good news is that there will, as always, be things that we can do to help you plan in the most efficient way. And as always, we'll be 100% focused on developing and bringing to you the best and most effective solutions and tax planning for you and your circumstances. We will be running another event towards the end of November. I think it's the 21st of November. And there'll be a link coming out after this on the email following this. So please make sure you book for that. That will be a more detailed drill down once we've had a chance to reflect on the changes and talk in much more detail about the next steps you need to be considering if, as many will be, you are impacted by the changes in this budget. And there's also a link going onto the chat for you to register your interest in a follow-on catch-up with one of our tax consultants. So please feel free to click on that link, fill in your details on the form, and also make sure you register for that event, which will be running towards the end of November, because there'll be a lot of helpful guidance and suggestions on that coming forward. So thank you for all for joining this event, this Rapid Reaction 2024 Autumn Budget Summary event, and we look forward to seeing you on the next event. Thank you.